Thank you, Howard, for putting this together. With readings, it's always easier to play it safe and just go with stuff that's published because it's already been edited and then you look smarter. But I brought new stuff just in case I felt inspired, and definitely Ross and Sharon, you were inspiring. That was cool. One of the coolest things about being a fiction writer is that you get to completely make up situations and scenarios and all of the details. And so I wrote a novel. I'm always working on way too many things at once because my brain's kind of all over the place. And I worked on 2 novels the last few years, and one of them was taking place in the Moss Street area by Fairmont in Eugene after the Cascadia quake. So I researched Oregon State's data on possibilities, and I decided that the quake was going to be a 9.2, which is pretty likely. And if it's a 9.2 full rupture, then the dams are going to break and there's going to be flooding. Although I really maximized flooding for the novel, so I isolated my main character. And she's going house to house in the neighborhood, and there are reasons why she decides to stay behind in the neighborhood. She's going house to house and collecting food and water and those basic things. But then she's also a curious character, so she decides to go through people's hiding places. And then as a fiction writer, I got to think about what people would want to hide. So I'm going to read from that book, which is probably not going to be a book now. I guess maybe it's going to be a podcast with Spotify, which shows how the world changes. I spend the next afternoon searching people's hiding places where my neighbors put things that they didn't want discovered. I have a backpack and a duffel bag to carry items back to my garage. My goal is to prepare to gather anything of value and to wait for my mother to return. Then together, we'll find a way out of this neighborhood, out of the city. I search normal hiding places, find weed stashes at the backs of closet shelves, 2 Rolex watches, mini baggies of Coke, snack-sized Ziplocs housing acid gel tabs, $838 in cash. I take all of that. Find dildos and vibrators in bedside drawers, KY lubrication in a cigar box, yours, mine, 2-in-1, intense pleasure, pocket rockets. I leave all of those things where I found them. Find porn under mattresses, straight porn, gay porn, fetish porn. Something with horses that seems like porn, but I'm not even sure why. I leave all of that too. A teenage girl's razor blade in a jar under a Justin Bieber poster. 1 drop of blood. Birth control pills, a switchblade. I take the knife. 2 condoms, size small, in a pillowcase. A flip-lock Gerber, mace spray connected to a rape whistle, and a rusty machete hidden inside a tall rubber boot. Those things all go into my duffel bag. I find naked Polaroids of a yellow-haired man. A blurry picture of 2 clothed people kissing, red Solo cups and ping pong balls in a Target bag, rolled up in a down coat and stuffed under a bed. 20 ounces of mixed hard liquor in a 1-liter Dr. Pepper bottle wedged behind the back leg of a desk. I take a big drink. Cough, set the bottle down, keep searching as I'm buzzing. An unloaded .22 caliber pistol in a size 13 shoe. No bullets, but I take the gun anyway. I discover what might be heroin tar. I think, I'm not sure. I've never sold heroin tar, but I've seen it on Netflix. I leave it. A detailed sketch of a naked woman in her 50s or 60s covering her breasts, an arrow pointing to her shaved vagina, a picture of a tribal tattoo, a picture of a butterfly on a young woman's lower back, 17 pictures of the same blonde-haired grade school girl posing in a 2-piece bathing suit. I move on. Find 17 gold coins, take them, plus a short, sharp hatchet with an engraved handle. Throw that in my duffel bag as well. A picture of 11 staples in the scalp of a man or woman, hard to tell. I put the picture back in a hiking boot in a closet. A metal baseball bat with a dent in the middle. A note that reads, "That was fucked up. We can't ever do that again. Ever." So sometimes you're just making things up, figuring out what would be going on in a situation. And then sometimes you have something major in your life that affects the way that you write, or affects the type of novel you write, or affects a character. And I've been struggling with a brain injury for the last few years from getting hit on my bike by an SUV. And then I had a grand mal seizure from that accident and hit my head again. And so I did cognitive therapy and neurovision therapy and just sort of struggled through the last few years. And I decided to write a novel where a character has a brain injury. And he's not me. He was a civilian contractor in Iraq, but some of his understanding of the world and reshaping of his world has to do with my new understanding of the world. So I thought I'd read short chapter 2 in the novel that I'm working on right now. A few months ago, 2 years after Iraq, I decided to celebrate the summer solstice by eating a maple bar and ketchup. Tomas says my weird food combinations are fucked up, and I guess they are weird, but they're just one of the things that's changed about me since my brain injury. I got into my truck and drove to the Sisters Bakery. There was no line for donuts, so I ordered, paid, tipped the cashier, and took a McDonald's ketchup packet out of my pocket. I squirted the ketchup all over the top of the maple bar and ate a bite, smiled at the deliciously salty and sweet mixture. I walked back to my truck, got in on the driver's side, turned the key in the ignition, pressed the gas to rev the engine, glanced in the side mirror, and pulled out onto the road. I never saw the other car. One moment the road was clear, and the next moment I had a car coming from my left in my lane, heading straight toward my driver's side. I got my knee out of the way in time, shifted my hips, heard the screeching of tires as we both hit our brakes, but it didn't matter. There was no time for either of us. The speed limit is 25 on the main road through Sisters, but everyone drives 35 or 40 in the early morning when there isn't traffic. The car hit my truck at the bottom of my door, and the door caved most of the way up to my left elbow. My head whipped to the side, but it didn't hit anything. I remember thinking, even in that moment, that it was good I didn't hit my head again. I looked down at the car crunched against the side of my truck, and I saw its front end raised like an upside-down V, its engine block smashed to the steering wheel. I didn't know how messed up my truck was going to be, but I was sure of one thing right away. The other car was totaled. It was a Honda Civic. A guy in his late 20s was driving, with a college-age girl in the passenger seat. When the driver got out of his car, I could see there was something wrong with his hand, but the girl seemed fine. She was moving normally. Neither of them bleeding, and they were out right away, but I stayed in my truck for a minute, just thought about things. The sound of the accident, how quickly everything always seems to happen. I thought of Olivia, Ray Ray, my grandpa, and a bear coming across the mesa in the moonlight, the way his shoulders rolled with each step, not 100 feet from our cabin. I closed my eyes. Time is something I can't keep straight anymore, events blending together in my brain, and I'm not always sure why. If I try to tell a story about the other day, I end up explaining something that happened in my childhood. Or if I try to talk about my childhood, I can tell you about now, this morning. Loops coiled, a rope piled on the floor, no telling where the ends are, too many overlapping strands. But this car accident? I had a 6-inch welt on my right forearm that didn't make any sense because I couldn't figure out how I could have gotten it. I looked all around, tried to match the welt up against the steering wheel, then the dash, but the mark didn't equal anything, and I stared at the raised pink line already beginning to turn dark. My driver's door was so smashed that I couldn't open it. I had to slide across the bench seat to get out on the passenger side, and I shook my head knowing right away that I'd be doing that move across the bench seat for a long time, until I had enough money to get my truck fixed, maybe forever. When I got to the sidewalk, the girl from the Honda was standing next to the smashed up front end of their car screaming, "Holy shit, just look at, holy shit." I said, "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Then the driver was walking around the front end of my truck. He said, "What the fuck were you thinking, man?" He was coming at me like he was going to punch me, but his one hand was still curled up sort of funny. It reminded me of the way a raven's talon folds back when the bird lifts into the air. I doubted if that driver could make a solid fist. "I'm sorry," I said, and backed up a few steps just in case. No, really, the driver said. Tell me what the fuck you were thinking. He stepped in too close. His nose was almost touching my chin, and I could smell the coffee on his breath. Really said, I'm sorry, I didn't see your car. He was shorter than me, and when I looked down to see his face, I also noticed that I was still holding the last bite of my maple bar. There was a little dot of ketchup on top of the icing. It looked like a spot of blood. The driver said, what's wrong with you? For some reason, I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to say a lot of things. Actually, there's a lot wrong with me. I had a headache like most mornings, and everything was starting to feel fuzzy at its edges. I could tell I was going to have trouble putting thoughts together by early afternoon. I knew I might have a focal seizure later, too. On a day like this, my brain might just time out. Then I'd stare off for a while, come back later, and wonder where I was. I considered telling him that I don't like loud noises or flashing lights, or this much attention, or stress. I looked at the piece of maple bar in my hand and popped it into my mouth. The guy clenched his jaw when I did that. He said, are you just going to eat right now? Are you fucking happy with yourself? Even though he was shorter than me, he was sort of wide, sort of strong looking. His shoulders were twitching and his neck muscles were like steel wires pulled tight. For some reason, I started crying right then. I was chewing my last bite of maple bar, crying and smiling at the same time. Sometimes it feels like my emotions are all mixed up, like there are too many things going on in my head at once, or sometimes I cry at nothing at all and I can't explain myself, so I lie. I tell people that I must have gotten something in my eye, or I'm specific about it, and I say, you know those little black bugs with wings? One of them just flew into my eye just now. So I was crying and chewing, and I must have looked away because that's when he punched me in the stomach. I never knew if he used his claw hand or his good hand, and I didn't flex or anything before he hit me because I didn't see it coming. It felt like his punch opened a hole inside the middle of me where all the tubes and hoses are connected. I choked on that last little bit of maple bar that was still in my mouth, and I tried to suck in breath, but there was no way I could get any air. It was like the punch clogged the top of my lungs. I fell to my knees on the pavement, then onto my side. I put my cheek against the ground and I lay there. Felt the ripples in the cement against my face. My knees came up to my chest as a reflex. Then I stayed, sort of in a ball on my side, eyes open, staring out in front of me. I started to breathe again, just a little bit, but not as much as I wanted to. I couldn't relax my stomach muscles enough to get a good deep breath. The man's brown shoes were right in front of my face, but I couldn't make those shoes come into focus. They were hazy. The college girl was yelling something, but it didn't sound like English. My brain wasn't transitioning words into sentences. I only remembered the volume of the girl's yelling. I blinked and coughed and tried to suck in air, choke some more. My eyes began to water, then the whole world went blurry. I closed my eyes. Maybe I fell asleep, or maybe I just rested. When I opened my eyes again, there were people all around, different colored shoes, all of the shoes making a semicircle in front of my face. Someone said, do you think he's going to be okay? There was a long pause. No one spoke. A pair of red shoes shuffled in front of me. Seriously, though, do you think he's going to be okay? A different voice said, I don't know. I blinked again. The red shoes took a step back. We should do something. Honestly, someone said, he might not be okay. Thank you. So lately I've been trying to write more poetry, which my agent thinks is insane. Since the last poem I published, I got paid $10 for. So, but I always wanted to be a poet, so I'm pretty happy to read with a poet. Makes me almost feel like a poet. I brought 2 poems that are true. And then a third poem that's true. This first poem is called Fairy Tales for Terrified Children. The decomposing loam is a smell so strong after the rain, it's almost a taste in my mouth. It mixes with the long-eared sage and juniper, not bearing but sticky with resin, as the pine cones of the ponderosas fall through the lower trees like squirrels who've lost their branches. I've lost my branches as well, but I don't talk about it. Won't say, My brain is not what it used to be. I'm not capable of what I used to do, and everything feels different. I walk out past the last volcanic boulder, where a small patch of trees were struck by lightning a few years ago and burned. The hollow skeletons that remain are riddled by wind-smoothed holes. Under my feet, the cryptobiotic breaks in pans of dirt, spaces opening between the trees, only bitter brush giving shade to the ground, where I discover a coyote kill, a mule deer pulled down, eaten and torn apart, the deer's antlers turned into the soil as if he tried to fight the earth. I do not know how it feels to be encircled by a pack, a new enemy always snapping its jaws from behind, and if you turn to look, another ready to advance on your blind side. I do not know how it feels to be a mule deer, but I do know what it means to step away from my life, or to have my life step away from me. To see the black-burned trees of my past, the truth that even the new growth will not be the same as the old. I know the difficulty of being an animal, of being a human, rain washing the bones coming up through the wildflowers, sun-bleached spine, a scapula like a wide flat spoon, ribs that remind me of tines on pitchforks carried by villagers, humans coming through forests in search of monsters. And these last two poems I wrote in the last 3 days. Gamble reading right here. This first poem is titled, When my agent wrote me an email saying she didn't connect with my writing since my When my agent wrote me an email saying she didn't connect with my writing since my traumatic brain injury. I was cutting Palo Verde branches for my father. I'd flown to Tucson after his hip surgery. He needed help with little things around the house, pulling weeds, sweeping off his porch, moving items to the garage. I put a mattress out in his backyard, slept under the stars, woke in the middle of the night to see the winter constellations, Orion and Canis Minor, Auriga, and in the morning sun-soaked my sleeping bag as hummingbirds flitted among the acacia trees above my head. I went up on Tumamoc Hill to find orange barrel cactus flowers, a saguaro forest, ocotillo in bloom, fruta de nopal, prickly pear. But instead, hiking off trail, I discovered 2 black-tailed rattlesnakes, coiled and copulating in an andesite hollow. And then I realized that everything I was going to read was full of cuss words and dark, so this is a different kind of poem. I actually got a note from an editor once, 2 books ago. The editors at Random House count everything, the copy editors, and it was a book that had teenage best friends and a lot of teenage characters, and I work with teenagers. And this copy editor wrote me a note and said, there are 255 swear words in this draft. And so I wrote back, yeah, but are there enough? This last poem, last thing I'm going to read, is titled, There's a Better Movie in the Theater Next Door. I used to write from the couch while my daughter Rue played out the lives, the clandestine voices, the love affairs and deceits of her Barbies on the floor at my feet. There was something about Saturday mornings, coffee balanced precariously on the arm of the couch next to me, and my laptop stacked on a pillow over my thighs, me writing stories that would never become books, poems that would never be published, weekend failures that were much less entertaining than the imagination of my young daughter. As I wrote under the cloak of Rue's plot designs, a voice coming from her blonde mermaid, or the boy who loved her, or maybe from Spider-Man with his one arm that shot a web powered by a spring. I wrote failed plot devices as a pink plastic car broke down in the middle of the desert, as a mother betrayed her daughter, as a father didn't see the kiss between the teenage girl and the boy she wasn't supposed to date. Thanks for having me.